العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له هو يتولى الصالحين وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد, continuing in Zadul-Ma'ad, authored by Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah. Essentially, Zadul-Ma'ad. It's essentially a book that harmonizes the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is a difference between hadith and a sunnah. What is that distinction? Every sunnah is a hadith, but not every hadith is a sunnah. Right? So when we look at hadith, we see that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, many things have been narrated to us. I mean, the companions radiyallahu anhum meticulously documented and noticed every little thing about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Religious things, things that have to do with revelation, and things that don't necessarily have to do with revelation, such as what he liked to eat, certain dishes that he liked specifically. The companions radiyallahu anhum narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's favorite cut from a sheep is the shoulder. Is that a religious sunnah? Not necessarily. That's something that's of preference. If a person came along and said, well, I prefer the tongue or I prefer some other part, would this person be disregarding the sunnah if that was not his favorite part? The answer is no. This is a natural thing. This is what the scholars referred to as umur jibiliyya, right? And these things have their own ruling. However, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was also narrated to have commanded that an animal be slaughtered in such a way and that Bismillah be said and so forth. That's a religious aspect. And so the companions radiyallahu anhum, they narrated everything that they saw from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Everything. Anas radiyallahu anhu narrates the amount of white hairs that were in his beard and head before his death, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, this isn't necessarily a sunnah. This is a hadith, right? It's a hadith. It's a narration. The sunnah is what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said or did or acknowledged with the intention that Allah be worshipped through these means, in this way. This is the way that he worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the sunnah, right? And so, in that, there are many things. There are some things that are abrogated. There are some things which he did before and didn't do later. There are things that he did later that were not intentional as to be followed. There were things that he did in private that were personal things. There were things that he did in public, etc. And so distinguishing between a hadith and a sunnah can be somewhat of a cumbersome task at times. Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah, this book is essentially taking all of the hadith and the narrations and documenting the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for the most part. We are in the chapter regarding things that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited or disliked or discouraged be said. or things that someone may do in ways of speech, whether that be things that people say or things, the way people say things, etc. Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, وَمِنْهَا أي من المكروهات اللفظية، والمكروه هنا بمعنى المحرم، ومنها سباب المسلم. سباب المسلم يعني سب المسلم، وهذا أمر محرم، بل هو كبيرة من كبائر الذنوب. جاء عن عبد الله بن عمر في الصحيحين: سباب المسلم فسوق وقتاله كفر. فالسباب أمره عظيم عند الله، وكثير من الناس يخلط بين السب ويخلط بين التفحش في الكلام. لا يجب أن يكون الكلام فيه فحش حتى يكون سبا. السب كما عرفه شيخ الإسلام رحمه الله في الصارم المسلول: السب كل لفظ أريد به التنقص فهذا هو السب. كل لفظ أردت به أن تتنقص من المسبوب فهذا يعتبر سبا في الإسلام، مثل أن تتهم شخصا في أبيه، أو مثل أن تقول فلان أنت ذميم الخلق، ذميم الخلق، يعني قبيح، أو ناقص السياسة أو ناقص العقل. ليس على باب أو ليس من باب النصح، وهذا له أسلوبه، ولكن من باب التنقص. يتشفى الساب بالأخذ والنيل من المسبوب، إن كان في غيابه فهذه غيبة، وإذا كان في حضوره فهذا هو السب، وهذا كله محرم في الإسلام. One of the things that is prohibited is insulting a Muslim. Sometimes people translate this as cursing a Muslim. No, it's insulting a Muslim. And a lot of times people confuse insulting with vulgarity. It doesn't have to be vulgar. You don't have to use bad words for it to be considered insulting. Insulting is saying or implying anything that articulates disrespect, that you mean to demean the person that you are insulting. This could be in any way. Speaking about someone's parent or father or tribe. It could be speaking about someone's country, speaking about someone's origins, speaking about someone's children, right? Not in the sense of admonishment, and that has its care that needs to be taken, but in the sense of meaning to dispirit that person, meaning to insult them, meaning to demean that person. This could be anything that is in their hand or outside of their hand. Insulting their race, insulting their complexion, insulting their features, saying someone is an ugly person or something of that sort. It could also be in the sense of this person you have no manners, you are this, that, anything that a person says or implies to another person that is demeaning, and you mean to demean that person. This is insulting, even if you don't use bad words. If you use bad words, it becomes worse, obviously. If you do this to someone who is absent, this is backbiting. And if you do it to someone who is present, then this is insulting. Oftentimes, when someone backbites another person, speaks about them in their absence, if you admonish them and say, don't speak about the brother, he's not even here to defend himself, something like that, what will the person usually respond? Immediately. So imagine this with me. Let's say you're speaking, someone's speaking about another person, and we say to them, hey man, don't say that about him. What do they usually respond with? Huh? I'll say it in his face, right? There's another one too that I'm looking for. I say, man, don't say that about him. He'll say, well, it's true, right? So those are the two things usually people say. Either they'll say, it's true, or I'll say it to him in his face, right? Well, that's even worse, right? The fact that you're willing to insult someone to their face is not a merit and is not something that justifies ghibah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ. Al-Lumaza has been explained by some of the Salaf as one who insults people in their absence and in their presence. That's humaza, lumaza, right? And it's also said that al-humaza, al-lumaza is one who insults who speaks ill about another or insults a person verbally or with a gesture, right? Bil-hams or bil-lams. Whether that be by gesture or by way, winking or something with their hands or using their words. So this statement of, I'll say it to his face, I've said it to him before, things like that people usually say to defend their actions, this is not justification. This is something which is haram. And in a person's absence, it's bad. But in a person's presence, it's worse, arguably. Why? Because now you are causing direct enmity between yourself and this individual. Interestingly enough, psychologically speaking, most people, when they speak about another person, the listener usually attributes those traits to the person speaking, subconsciously. So psychologists have kind of done some research, and this is obviously not why we obey the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We don't obey him because scientists say that it's correct. We don't wait for their approval. Rather, it's the other way around. But it's just something that is to be mentioned, and that is that they found that when a person speaks about another person, so let's say a person comes to you and says, this other person, he's this, he's that, right? He's a liar or he's ugly, right? What they noticed is that most times the listener on the subconscious level usually comes to affirm what this person said about the other, affirm it for that person who's speaking. So if you go and tell, if a person goes and tells, he's a very ugly person, the listener usually will ascribe ugliness to the person speaking. It's not a conscious thing. It's just something that subhanAllah, usually happens. The point is that, people who backbite, people who are insulting, it's not permissible to listen to that. But just keep in mind that people that have two faces, or three or four, you're not special. They're not telling you this because the other person is bad and you're good. They're telling you this because you're willing to listen. And in your absence, they're probably saying all kinds of things about you as well. That's usually how it goes with people of that fabric. So the point is that insulting a Muslim is a major sin. And it is something which is impermissible in Islam. The more that person is reputable, the more influential that person is on the religion of Allah or the Muslims, the more serious that offense becomes. So insulting or backbiting a Muslim is a major sin. Backbiting a scholar or someone who is influential to the Muslims, someone who's influential to Islam, it becomes even worse because now you're not just bringing that person's down, but you're bringing whatever that person represents down as well. And you are causing misgivings about that person and what they represent in the heart of the listener. He says, وَأَنْ يَتَنَاجَ اثْنَانِ دُونَ الثَّالِثِ. Another thing which is impermissible is that two people, if there's a group of three, that two of them pass secrets between one another in the presence of the third, meaning that they whisper to each other something that they don't want the other person to hear. This is something which is haram. It's mentioned in the Quran. And the reason for this is that it causes the other person to have suspicions about what you're speaking about, and it causes them at least to feel left out, right? And this is something which is impermissible. Anything that will make a Muslim sad, if it is not absolutely necessary, is not permissible. That is just a general rule. He says, وَأَن تُخْبِرَ الْمَرْأَةُ زَوْجَهَا بِمَحَاسِنِ امْرَأَةٍ أُخْرَى. And we covered a lot of these last week. Another thing which is impermissible is that a woman describe to her husband another woman's features. Another woman's features. This is something which is impermissible. And that is that a woman's features, whatever she conceals under her hijab, is considered to be a awra. It's considered to be something which is essentially her secret. And when you describe what you've seen of that person to another, this becomes haram. And obviously this is even worse. Not just a woman describing another woman to her husband, but that's what the narration exactly says. But we can derive from this any kind of description that removes or penetrates the veil of another woman, right? Or another man. A woman may describe to her friends the private aspects of her husband or of a man that she was with before. Or a man may, which is, of course, abhorred, a woman may describe to another something private about her husband or her previous husband, or a man may describe his sister or someone of his family to another man. Any kind of description in this way is haram. Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he mentioned that a woman described the features of another woman to her husband. Why did he say it that way? Because that's exactly what the narration said. That's most common. Most commonly, A woman will go, she'll be at a gathering with other women, she'll see them without hijab, and in her banter with her husband, she'll describe the features of that woman to her husband. This is something which is haram, but anything in that vein is impermissible. Another is, Allahumma ghfirli in shit, is that a person in his dua say, oh Allah, forgive me if you choose to, or if you will. This is something that we discussed in detail last week. وَمِنْهَا الْإِكْثَارُ مِنَ الْحَلِفِ. Another is that a person swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala too much, constantly. I swear by Allah, wallahi, wallahi. This is something that, it's kind of demeans Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's, the gravity of Allah's name in the heart of the listener and the person who is swearing. ومن الألفاظ المكروهة الإفصاح عن الأشياء التي ينبغي الكناية عنها. Another thing which is discouraged, something that is impermissible, is to describe things in detail that should only be referred to in passing, right? And this happens a lot, especially in our language in English, and the way that our idioms are set up, and the way that our words are, and the way that the culture is, because the culture of the people is what forms the language, right? And so there are things that people will say that are unnecessary. Like, for instance, a person, it's especially bad when it's a female speaking to a male or other females, but it's not appropriate for both genders. But a woman has an elegance about her. She has a kind of mystique of beauty about her, and if she does or says things that removes that veil, it becomes she's making herself ugly, kind of, in the listener's mind, and that becomes somehow worse than someone whom that is not his hallmark. So, for instance, a person, instead of saying, I'd like to use the restroom, they say, I have to go, do this or do that in the restroom, and describe the kind of bowel movement or the kind of urination that they're going to have. This is unnecessary. This is not something that should be said. A person just says, I really have to go to the bathroom. That's enough, right? To say, I need to go do this in the bathroom, that's inappropriate, right? Or, for instance, if a woman is on her cycle, she says, I'm on my cycle or something of that nature, that's fine. But to say other things that are more detailed, that's inappropriate. And this culture here that we're in right now, this is exactly the kind of stuff that they're trying to get rid of. We have commercials, right, about things that are very... a good example of this is, how often do you see pictures or commercials of a man, or even worse, a woman, sitting on the toilet, right? It's all the time. It's unnecessary. We don't need to see that, right? It's demeaning and it's disgusting. It's something that happens in private. The Prophet ﷺ, when he would use the restroom, when he would relieve himself, he would go so far out that you couldn't even see his whole body while he was using the restroom. And we discussed this in previous chapters, that a person must conceal his private parts when he uses the restroom, and is encouraged to conceal his whole body when he's using the restroom, right? Is encouraged to conceal his whole body while he's using the restroom, because you don't want people to see you in that light. Yes, it's something that we all do. Yes, it's something that is common and we all use the restroom. But it doesn't mean we need to speak about it. It doesn't mean we need to talk about it or demonstrate it to one another, right? So now we have commercials with, commercials or in movies or what have you, people, sitting on the toilet, using the bathroom, or, a part in a movie will come up where the person is using the bathroom and show us and give us sound and give us. This is just unnecessary vulgarity, right? We have commercials about menstruation, whether it be like pads or something like that for menstruation, and then we have women standing there describing to us in detail how this menstruation takes place and what it's like and how it should be, and then we say, oh, this is liberating, it's liberating women when they speak about these things. This is just disgusting vulgarity. It doesn't need to be spoken about, right? These are things that the human body does that you keep to yourself, right? And the examples of this are many. Men describing certain things about themselves or describing certain things about their acts, or the extreme, intense, hypersexualized vulgarity that goes on, where people describe their intimate details of how they do what with who. These are all things which are impermissible and a person should never speak about in public. Another thing which is impermissible is to refer to impermissible taxation as rights. What is he talking about? So al-mukus is when, and sometimes people misunderstand taxation. There are a couple types of taxation. There is taxation that is absolutely haram, and this is what is referred to as al-mukus. Taxation which is absolutely haram is like a king, or how it used to be, which is kind of one of the ways that, or how we're taught that America was initially established, and that is that they were fleeing from the taxation of the British, right? So they came over here, and the king would send every year for taxes to be taken from the citizenry living here. But they don't receive anything in return for this taxation. It's just the king's right upon his people is that he tax them, right? They don't receive anything in return. This is what is referred to as al-mukus in the legislation of Islam. This is haram, and no one has the right to collect, and no one has the right to take these mukus, right? Then we have other types of taxation. I can't say all the taxation that happens in America is like this, but much of it is taxes that we pay that usually come back to us in some way, whether it be pave the roads or hospitals or police, access to police or access to fire, access to search and rescue, things like that, right? This is a type of taxation, but it's not considered mukus in the legislation of Islam, because it's not just something which is taken with no return. It's taken for the common good of the rest of everyone in the state, in the country, in the community, and there has to be a level of socialism for a community to thrive properly. And notice I didn't say socialism, I said a level of socialism. There has to be a level of us all getting together and pooling our resources together for everyone to have a fair shot at essentials. That is fine. absolute socialism, like communism and stuff like that, that's obviously has nothing to do with Islamic values. But one of the things is that this kind of taxation, which is haram taxation that we mentioned, the first type, for this to be referred to as the rights of the king or the responsibility of the citizens, that is as haram to refer to something like that in that way, because it's manipulating the truth. This isn't the right of the king. It's not the responsibility of the citizens, right? Another example of that is riba, to refer to riba as fawaid, right? Or interest. It's usury. It's not interest. Interest is giving something that is very terrible a nice name. It's not interest. It's usury. And it's called usury in the English language for a reason, because you are using another person, you're using his bad set of circumstances, you are capitalizing on another person's misfortune to better and line your pockets. It's called usury, and that's a bad name, and that's good, because that's what it needs to be called. When we call it things like interest, it becomes a business strategy, right? The same thing happens in Arabic. People refer to it as fawaid, and this is direct translation of the word interest. Scholars have prohibited using this language to describe it. It should be referred to as riba, because it is haram, and that's what is referred to in the Quran. And when you change the name of something, you change its ruling. When you change its name, you change its ruling, right? Another example of that is referring to riba as fees. You know, we can flip it around and say, well, you know, it's just a fee, whatever kind of fee that is. That's another way that a shaitan uses to manipulate the truth to change its ruling. A shaitan was the first to do this in recorded history in the Quran when he referred to the tree that Adam was urged to eat from and prohibited by Allah. He referred to it as شجرة الخلد وملك لا يبلى, the tree of eternity, the eternal tree, or a dominion that will never diminish, right? That's giving a very nice sounding name to something that's very terrible. Abbas al-Ghifari, radiyallahu anhu, narrates to us and others that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said in Musnad Ahmad and elsewhere, لا يستحلن طائفة من أمة الخمر يسمونها بغير اسمها, that a group of my nation, people, near the end of time, they will consider intoxicants permissible, and they will do so by changing the name. Instead of calling it an intoxicant, instead of calling it poison, they'll refer to it with fancy names that spark an air of delight in the listener's mind. This is something which is haram, and it's a type of lying, it's a type of dishonesty. A person, when he speaks, he needs to name good things with good names and bad things with bad names. Not vulgar names, but names that articulate the truth about this thing. أو لما ينفقه في طاعة خسرت كذا. Another thing which is impermissible is to refer, now we spoke about money that is haram, referring to it, or that is spent in haram, referring to it with a good name. Like calling usury interest, or calling illegal taxation, rights or responsibilities. On the other side, it's haram to refer to money that is spent on good things with bad names. So to say, for instance, that you gave in charity this much, or you spent this on someone, and you say, I lost that money this year, right? I lost this and this money. That money was not lost. It's not considered a loss. Only those who disbelieve in Allah in the last day consider charity to be a loss. Only those who disbelieve in Allah in the last day consider charity to be a loss. Charity is a gain. It's the only real gain, actually, right? Because all of your wealth is going to stay here on earth, and you're going to depart from it, except for that wealth that you spend for the sake of Allah and then find with Allah after your death. That's the only real wealth that you get to keep. Every other wealth is going to stay here on earth, either be someone else's or you're going to consume that wealth here on this earth. Another thing which is impermissible, and each of these statements, each of these sentences, honestly, you could write an essay on. These are actually very deep subjects, and they deserve more time. But in the interest of time and in the interest of continuity, we'd like to keep a particular flow going. Otherwise, every one of these statements that he's making, there are narrations and entire essays have been written on each of these issues. Another thing is to say, أنفقت في هذه الدنيا مالا كثيرا. To say, in this, I've spent so much money in this world. Kind of boasting about the amount of money that you've spent on your home or this or that, whatever it is. This is something which is as well impermissible. ومنها أن يقول المفتي أحل الله كذا وحرم كذا في مسائل الاجتهاد. فإذا في نص عن رسول الله أو عن الله سبحانه وتعالى مثل قوله تعالى وأحل الله البيع وحرم الربا. فإذا قال المفتي أحل الله البيع وحرم الربا هذا صحيح. لكن في مسألة اجتهادية، يعني نوع من أنواع المعاملات اختلف فيها الفقهاء والمجتهدون، وليس فيه نص عن الله أو رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم، وإنما المسألة اجتهادية واختلف أهل العلم، فلا ينبغي للمفتي أن يقول حكم الله كذا أو أحل الله كذا أو حرم الله كذا، لأن المسألة اجتهادية. لا يعني أن الله سبحانه وتعالى لم يحرم أو يحل شيئا من هذا، وإنما هذه مسألة يفتي فيها المفتي بالظن، بغلبة الظن. كثير من الأحكام الفقهية هي يحكم عليها الفقهاء بغلبة الظن، يترجح عنده كذا وكذا. لكن إذا كانت المسألة هكذا والمسألة ليس فيها نص عن الله أو رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم من قرآن أو سنة أو إجماع، فإنه لا يجوز أن يعبر عن اجتهاده بحكم الله. اجتهاده وحكم الله سبحانه وتعالى قد يتفقان وقد يختلفان. ومن الغلط أيضا المستفتي أن يقول ما حكم الله في كذا أو ما حكم الله في كيت وكيت في مسألة ليس فيها نص، بل يقول الإنسان ما حكم كذا، ما حكم فعل كذا أو قول كذا أو إلى آخره، ولا يعبر عنه بما حكم الله في كذا إلا مسألة ظاهرة فيها شيء فيها نص عن الله ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم أو إجماع بين أهل العلم. إلى هنا نقف إن شاء الله، ونستمر الأسبوع القادم، والله أعلم، وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. الحمد لله رب العالمين.